Hi and welcome to TEC Bike Parts. Today we're going to be looking at an update on what we've been doing with the Royal Enfield Himalayan. We've been running this bike as a development bike all this year now, right through the winter weather and all the way through the summer. It tends to get used even as a shop bike. I normally run it with a pair of throw-over panniers on the back, and we just go and collect things and drop things off in it. It's really handy for that. My initial thoughts I did a video about this bike was it was a bit underpowered, and we're going to look at ways at getting around that. The good news is we've fully developed the part that we had in mind. We've had several different versions in the bike. We've done dyno runs and durability testing on it on 3 different bikes. We're now happy, and we've put it's going into production. It will be ready in around about Christmas time. I'll not mention much more at the moment because we're going to do a proper product launch on it. But it isn't a big bore kit, if that's what you're wondering. It isn't particularly hard to fit the bike. It takes about an hour to install, and it gives you 20% more power. Importantly, it gives you more power at the top end as well as in the mid-range, which allows you to run, which I said initially about the gearing on this bike. It was geared so it was revving too high at sort of dual carriageway and motorway speeds. It allows you to go up a tooth on the front sprocket, but more of that later. And it's completely transformed the bike from a bike that I was not particularly happy with on using for longer distances. It was fine for around the lanes and around town, but as soon as you start going onto a busier A road or dual carriageway or motorway, you really couldn't keep up with the speed of the traffic, and if you did, you were caning the motor, you had the throttle wide open, and the revs were in the red line almost all the time, because the standard gearing goes into the red at 83 miles an hour or something, and basically, you know, you couldn't overtake anything. That was the most dangerous thing. If you were overtaking a car and he put his foot down even slightly, you were sort of stuck in there on the wrong side of the road. Now, with this modification with 20% more power, it gives you a lot more confidence to overtake things. It also pulls much better up hills. The revs aren't as high. You don't use as much throttle anymore, interestingly. And the miles per gallon and cruising revs are much improved. So it's completely transformed the bike. We've done a completely separate video on that, including all the development on the bike and installation on the bike of how you install it, with videos of the dyno runs before and after, and with different little tweaks like silencers and stuff like that to show what difference they would make as well. But I'm not going to go into that more. This is just a teaser to get you in to see if you're interested, and they will be hopefully out before Christmas. Right, moving on with some of the things we've done with the bike, some of the little annoying things we found, and some of the things we really liked. First of all, starting with the front end, I'm sure if you've got one of these bikes, you'll find the rear brake is fabulous, but the front brake doesn't have any bite, and you don't have a lot of confidence in it if you want to stop it hard, particularly if you've come off a bike that had dual discs or better brakes even. What I found, I had a good look at the brake. The caliper's quite good. It's a Brembo caliper, but I don't know who's made the brake pads. They've got sintered copper metal in them, but unusually they look like almost bits of wire. They're actually quite large, and what you can see by the lines in the pad and the way it's been clumping together, I'm not sure if they're actually too large, the pieces, or they've actually been fusing together during braking to form larger parts and then dragging the metal out of the pad. This is causing high spots where you're only getting metal contact with the disc, therefore it's got no bite and no feel. So, as I do with quite a few bikes, we fitted some EBC. Now, we didn't use the normal road HH sintered compound in these. We've gone for a GG compound, which is what we use on supermoto bikes and ATVs. Now, this is a road legal pad, but it's much better at different conditions, like wet conditions, dry conditions. It gives a consistent performance throughout, as well as giving great feel and good bite. It was actually developed for supermoto bikes that go off into the mud, then actually come onto a race circuit and need to brake really hard. So it gives you the best of all worlds. And like I say, it gives you good feel off-road, because if you put an HH pad and ride off-road, it gives too much bite and the ABS just kicks in all the time. So I've put a set in those in the bike, and the transformation is amazing. If anybody's worried, concerned about the front brake on the bike, or even the rear brake, fit a set of these pads, because they are absolutely fabulous. And it's gone from me not liking the brake to actually not even thinking about it, because it's consistent. It does work better when it's warm than when it's cold, like a lot of competition pads, but it isn't at the point where it doesn't work when it's cold. It just improves as it gets hot. And when you look at the pads, the sintered parts are almost like a metallic paint. They're so fine. It just looks like copper metallic. That's what they look like. But they're made in the USA by EBC. They're consistently high quality. I use them in all my bikes, EBC pads. Have done for years. Even in my cars I use them, because when we're racing, you need consistent performance, and they can be relied on. They don't tend to put them off to foreign countries, to have satellite companies making them for them. So they're on the website. We sell those now. Like I said, they're a well worthwhile investment. Moving back on the bike, the front forks. Now the front forks I found were actually quite comfortable most of the time, and tracked really well, but during hard compression, because they're just a damper rod fork, they tended to hydraulic lock a little bit. So what I've done is I've fitted a set of fork emulators in there, and that has vastly improved the high-speed compression damping. I've left everything else as standard while I ride them, just to check them out. I will probably add some ride height adjusters on the top so I can trim it. But I am going to change the shock as well at a later date, so I'll probably wait till then so we can trim the front and rear to get the best handling compromise. But I highly recommend the emulators, because they do transform the hard bump characteristic on the front end. Particularly if you're riding like potholed tracks, like potholed roads these days, it is much better than the standard system. I mentioned in the last video I just fitted a set of generic handguards, more because my hands were getting cold, but also when you're riding on trails, you go through like hawthorn and bramble bushes, and they can actually quite hurt you. They can go through your gloves, they're so sharp. So that tends to just brush any branches off. I also tend to save the levers if you come off. Added bar end mirrors. That's a personal preference for me. I think you can see a lot more out of them. And also, if you are going off-road, if you do any sort of steep climbs and you've got bar mirrors here, they'll tend to hit the back of your arm. And if you're lucky, they'll bend out the way. If not, you'll hurt your wrist. So I don't know why they put arm-type mirrors on off-road bikes. I just don't agree with them. It's the first thing I always remove and put something else on. I'll put adjustable levers on. Again, personal preference. I found that the position of the levers weren't to my liking, and these allow you to dial them in exactly where you want them. Another thing I did with the bars after quite a bit of experimentation is I've put some bar risers on. Now, I just made up a few sets of these because Royal Enfield use different bolt centres on the clamps to a lot of generic Japanese type ones. Normally they're between 24-25mm between centres, they're 28mm between centres on these. So most of the aftermarket bar risers you buy won't fit. So I've experimented with different heights. I mean, normally a bar riser is about 30mm, and I tried 10, 20, 40, 30, and I've come back with the 30 as being the ideal height for me, but you know, other people may vary on that. But what I found is, when I was standing on the pegs, I was leaning forward slightly with the standard bars, and that's cured it now, and I can ride much longer just standing on the pegs. It's actually really comfortable because the bars are a much nicer height. Just that little modification. So we're making some specific bar risers for these that height. They'll be available soon. Right. What we did find when we were looking at the performance of this bike we looked very carefully at the airflow over the motor. I'm sure a lot of people will be aware that the bike has an ambient air temperature sensor on it, and they're renowned for not reading correctly. In fact, mine used to consistently read 10 degrees Celsius more than what the air temperature was outside. It used to read correctly when the bike was cold, and as you rode away, it just absolutely shot up. And your hands might have been freezing on a cold day, and it was reading 26 degrees centigrade, so it was miles out. So we looked at what the problem was. We looked at the airflow over the motor and found where the sensor's mounted here, it actually gets a lot of heat build-up over the top of the airbox and around the sides and into here, and you get a bit of a hot spot where the actual sensor was mounted, which seems a bit of a stupid place to mount it to me. Now also in here is the air intake for the engine, and we actually moved the sensor to where the actual air intake is, and again the air going at the engine was almost superheated compared to the air outside, which is not a good thing for engine performance, and it was one of the things we looked at when we were looking at the performance of the bike. So what I did was actually manage the airflow a bit. I put a bit of neoprene rubber across the back here with a cutout for the regulator rectifier, just to try and stop too much air going into these side panels. I mean, it didn't drastically reduce it, but it did reduce it by about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, the air in here. So obviously it's a well-known mod that you move the sensor. So I moved the sensor up to the headstock for a couple of reasons, because I wanted to accurately measure the temperature up here, but also because I fitted a booster plug to the bike. Now, these bikes, when they're cold, and a lot of time at low throttles, they've got a tendency to be messy and stall. And now this is quite normal for Euro 4 bikes because the fueling is quite lean at lower revs. Now the booster plug is there designed to help with that. What it does, the ambient air temperature in here, which again is affected by this airflow, actually measures the air temperature going into the motor, and it adjusts the fuel to suit. Now if you fool that sensor by putting another sensor in line with this little box that the booster plugs does, it actually gives you a richer mixture because it thinks the air is colder than what it does. Now normally I use these sensors in the intake because it's sensing the cold air going in, but because the air was warmed coming into here, I even tried drilling holes in the side panel. This again did help a little bit, but not as much as I would like to have done. So what I did, I've mounted the booster plug as they recommend up by the headstock. I've actually fastened it to the ambient air temperature sensor, just so I can see the temperature that the booster plug's seeing as well. And it actually did improve the way the booster plug performed from here to there. And it just shows that, you know, it's doing its job. The bike now, you don't have to use the choke when it's cold. It actually idles straight away at 1200 RPM, and you don't get this fluffiness when you come back on the throttle or crack the throttle wide open, and it just generally rides nicer. It also loses its tendency to stall as well. I've had a lot of people, a couple of my friends have got these bikes as well, and both of them fitted the booster plug in. One of them was particularly bad at stalling the engine, and it cured that straight away. While we're in here, I've put a DNA air filter in, just so it's a washable filter. I had been riding trails quite a bit, and even at the first service you could see the dirt in the paper air filter. And if you do ride dusty trails, it's something you'd have to change quite regularly, the paper air filter, whereas the DNA, if you get a service kit, you can wash it for about 100,000 kilometres, I think they say. So it's something I tend to fit in all my bikes. The booster plug and the DNA filter are both available on our site. Since when we're in this area here, there's a couple of things to mention here. Since we've done the mod to the engine with a 20% more power, we've now been able to gear it up with a 16-tooth front sprocket, which the bike wouldn't have really pulled before we did the power increase. It did that. Now when you do it, you'll either have to put a link in the chain because the chain's just slightly too short for the extra tooth on the sprocket, or do what I've done, I've put a better quality chain on, because even after about 700 miles when I changed it, the standard chain was starting to look a bit tired already. It probably was just riding in the dirt and riding through the winter. But I've put a flashy gold plated chain on actually, but it's a good quality X-ring chain, and I noticed straight away I'm not having to adjust it like the old one. I was adjusting it every few weeks, but yeah, it doesn't stretch anything like the old chain did. Now, that, like I mentioned before, that gearing has transformed the way that the bike runs. It's much nicer. I feel like I could go on a much longer journey on this bike now that included higher speed roads. And like I say, I'm getting more miles to a tank full as well, which is a good indication, considering I'm riding the bike a lot faster now with the power increase. Another thing which I have lots of off-road bikes, and I think they should always have a folding tip gear lever, because if you just hit a rock or a branch or something, it'll either get hung up on it or bend it. It's not so bad with these because they don't go into a casing, so they're not really going to damage anything. But it's just nice to have if you catch the back of your leg or something on it as well. It's nice. The foot peg folds up, so I can't see why the gear peg. And I'm going to make an adjustable length, because I think they're a bit short as well. An adjustable length gear lever with a folding tip, but that's something that's in development at the moment. Seat. Now, I've been experimenting with different things on the seat to get the height right. Now, I've used one of these airbag seats, which are just cheap on eBay that you can buy, just to experiment with the seat height that I want to get to. Now, basically what I've come up with, I've got bits of foam under here as well. That is comfortable for me, but what I want to do is to make a proper seat. So I've got a spare seat, and I'm going to get my seat maker to basically follow a straight line across the top. I haven't particularly got a high inside leg, but I find when I was sitting on the standard seat, I was just sitting too low into the bike, and it was a lot of work to get back up and off the pegs to stand up and down. Also, it was putting a lot of weight on my spine, and I was getting butt ache with it, whereas this is cured it because you can take a bit more weight on your legs as you're actually riding. Now, what I would also like is, if we go to the top height here with this seat, I'm actually going to shave that much off the pillion as well. So you've basically got a one-piece motocross type seat, even though it's still in two parts. There'll be an unbroken line here, and it means as you're riding off-road you can slide up and down the seat. Off-road riding, you don't want to be sitting in one position all the time if you're sitting down. You really need to transfer your weight backwards and forwards. So that's something that's getting in development at the moment. I've got the seats off to my seat maker, and he's also going to put a gel pad in for me. So I'll keep you informed on how that's doing. We have been trying a few different types of engine bars on the bike. We were going to make our own, but frankly that side of the business is too busy at the moment. We haven't got time to make any new ones. So I have been trying some from different manufacturers. I tried some Indian made ones which really just stuck out too far and they didn't look particularly nice. I tried some Givey stroke Kappa ones, and I was quite impressed with the way they were made, and the pricing's quite good. So we've actually become a Kappa dealer, and we'll be selling the Kappa bars as well as Kappa luggage and other things as well. I'm the attitude why I make things if there's already something quite good out there. So they'll be on the website in a couple of weeks. I've been trying with luggage and various different things on the back as well, and again that's something that we'll be looking at the market as well at a later date. At the rear end, I'm going to try and make some sort of system where I can remount this number plate, because it isn't particularly pretty. I would like to try and bring it up a bit higher just to clean the looks of the back end of the bike up. Weight saving, I've been looking at quite a few things to save weight on the bike, because it is quite heavy for what it is. One of them is the battery. The standard battery doesn't seem particularly good quality, and if you leave the bike standing around for a couple of weeks it tends to go flat. So I'm going to put a lithium-ion battery in. I tend to run these on all my bikes because they're actually 1/3 of the weight of the standard battery, so you'll save a good few pounds of weight. Same reason I've changed the silencer on the bike as well. Nothing much more than just weight. The actual standard silencer performs quite well. It is a little bit quiet for my liking. I've put one of these Lextech ones on again. Again, we normally make our own exhaust systems, but these are actually so good and such good value for money. We became a dealer for selling them. Interestingly, when we put them on the dyno, they actually produce more power with the baffle in than with the baffle out. So, and they actually sound really nice with the baffle in, not too loud, but a nice burbly sound to them. And again, that saves a good bit of weight. So that and the battery, and also we're going to be putting a YSS alloy shock on this. I don't feel the standard shock is too bad, but it has no real adjustability other than spring preload on it. I wanted to put a height adjustability system on, and the YSS shock is height adjustable, as well as having damping adjustment and preload adjustment. And it, like I say, it's a much better quality unit. So before I put the YSS shock on, I wanted to put some better protection for the shock on, because I'd actually been riding the bike out in road salted conditions, and the shock was actually starting to go rusty. It wasn't going to last very long. So I've been running this a while. Basically, it's an old rear inner tube, split, and just mounted with a couple of stainless self-tappers and washers on there. Now, I purposely haven't cleaned the bike, just for you to see the amount of crud that this stops getting onto the shock. And the shock is still pretty clean. Yes, the shock looks a bit dirty because I've actually sprayed it with protectorant. But it does stop. I mean, if you look at the bottom, it was actually going rusty down here where the stamping is, and I cleaned it off and put some of the protectant on. The combination of that and this rubber flap is, and obviously this thing, you can see they're starting to get a hole worn in it there. It is a bit sacrificial, but I mean, they cost pennies to make. It's just, if you go to your local tyre place and get some old inner tubes, they'll probably give you them. Most people have got spares lying about anyway, so yeah, it's just a matter of chopping a strip off that and popping it in, and it also protects the linkages as well. It means you're not getting dirty water and grit into the bearings on the linkages. Right, with this bike, like I say, is a year-round bike. A lot of the bikes we don't tend to ride in the winter, but this bike gets ridden in the rain, the snow, in the mud. But particularly on British roads, a lot of road salt on the roads. Now, the first time I took it out in the road salt, I washed it off when I came back, but when I dried it off, I found I was starting to get little black spots on the spokes. Generally, a lot of the plated items on the bike aren't particularly high quality. So, before it started getting out of hand, I actually coated everything in XCP rust blocker. Now, I use this quite a bit on classic cars and bikes that I've got as well, and it actually works really well. It does tend to have a bit of a dull finish on, and it can make the bike look a little bit dirty, but a bike like this isn't particularly a show bike, and it's more functional tool, and I'm not too worried about that. So I actually coated the rims and the spokes, as well as all the linkages and all the bright plated items like the pins and everything and bolts. Now, even right in the salt, these have all stayed shiny and untarnished, which shows that it's doing its job. And you can just wash it off with a solvent when you're finished with it. So what I tend to do is about once a year, I'll give the bike a really good solvent wash, give everything a good wax polish, and then get a coat in XCP spray. Excuse me, and it works really well. One point, if you're doing your wheels, make sure you cover your discs and your calipers first before you do it, because you don't want it on your brakes, because obviously it's a grease, so your brakes will not work properly again if you get it on your brakes. Also, don't get it on your tyres as well, because it's obviously might be a bit slippy. Now, I've done most of the mods that most people do to them. I've lifted the front mudguard up a little bit. I'm actually going to be messing about with different front lower mudguards. Personally, for looks in the summer, I think that looks a little bit ugly, and I might just change that. I might also do some cosmetic changes on the front end as well. But, I mean, that's purely down to me. Personally, because I've lifted the seat and the bar height, I would like a higher screen, maybe slightly wider as well, for doing longer distances, just to protect the rider a bit more. So I may play around with something like that on the front end. Like I say, I'm looking at luggage, tank bags, side bags, all that sort of stuff. But generally, the bike is much better placed than when I got it. Like I say, I was a bit unsure if it was a bike for me. I felt it was underpowered. Now it's one of my favourite bikes that I jump on because of the lightness of it and the sort of softness of it. It's soft, but it's not underpowered. It's very hard to describe the actual ride one, but a lot of people love these bikes. But the feedback I got from myself and from other people who own them is you wouldn't really want to go on a long ride on it because it's a bit underpowered. Like I say, we've addressed that issue now, and I think a lot of people will look again at this bike now that this is available. And it's not an expensive modification, and it doesn't involve electronics or retuning or anything like that. But more on that when we release the full video around the end of the year. So thanks for watching. If there's any further updates with luggage, etc., we'll do another video on it. But for now, we're just enjoying getting miles on this bike and using it sort of every day. So bye for now. Thanks.